Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's Development Standards Committee. This meeting is being recorded, but is also being broadcast live on the Angus Council YouTube channel. Can I remind all those joining us remotely to turn their microphones to mute unless they wish to speak, and they should do so by raising their hands remotely. Can I also remind members that under Standing Order 13, remote members attending hybrid meetings where quasi-judicial and regulatory matters are being considered will not be permitted to participate by audio only and must have their video and camera functions switched on. Firstly, can I welcome Councillor Craig for the Development Standards Committee. Councillor Fotheringham was a previous member of this committee and thus brings considerable experience to it, and I'm sure will actively contribute to debate and decision making. So welcome, Craig. Do we have any apologies for absence, Sarah?
Yes, convener, an apology from Councillor Nicholl.
Thank you. Agenda item 2 is on declarations of interest or statements of transparency. I think we'll have a few. Councillor Melville.
Yes, thanks, convener. I've given advance notice of this, but I've had quite a lot of correspondence about the first item, the Ashley Mast. At no stage throughout any correspondence that I have engaged in have I given a view, and therefore this is a statement of transparency rather than a declaration of interest, and I'll be remaining in and voting.
Thanks, Councillor Melville. Councillor Fotheringham.
Thank you very much, convener, and thank you for your warm words of welcome to this committee. Like Councillor Melville, but I will declare a statement of transparency in items 7 and 8. For the last 2 years, I have not been a member of this committee, and I have had correspondence which I have responded to, but not formed any opinion. And I did meet with residents of Liff regarding the Grange of Berry Hill site, but again listened to their concerns and didn't inform any opinion, so I will remain in the meeting. Thank you.
That's fine, Councillor Fotheringham. Thank you. No other ones? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Doran. Apologies, I wasn't looking for you. Go ahead.
No, thank you. Similarly, received a lot of correspondence about this, but I've not formed any opinion, so I wanted to declare a statement of transparency. I also wanted to note as well that I did receive a phone call, but that was regarding a procedural matter regarding complaints procedure, and it wasn't until the end of the phone call that the person calling me noted that it was relating to the planning application that would be discussed in agenda item 7. But again, there was no discussion of that planning proposal that took place. It was regarding procedural matters relating to how to manage a complaints procedure, and at no point have I formed any opinion on that matter. So I wanted to issue a statement of transparency and stay in on this discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Doran. That's great. Okay, we'll move on. Thank you. Agenda item 3 is concerning the building warrants. Since our last meeting, the committee is asked to note that during the period 6th of April to 3rd of May of this year, a total of 68 building warrants, 3 demolition warrants and 25 amendment to warrants have been approved, with an estimated cost of £45,917,881. All members have been given a copy of this. Is that noted? Thank you. And thank you. And under agenda item 4, delegated decisions. Similarly, the committee is asked to note, again in the same period, 6th of April to 3rd of May, a total of 41 applications have been approved and 1 refused under the Planning Acts through the scheme of delegation to council officers. Again, is that noted?
Noted.
Thank you very much. Agenda item 5 is the minutes of our last meeting. Submit for approval as a correct record the minutes of our meeting on the 16th of April of this year. Are there any comments on these minutes or adjustments required necessary? In that case, are these noted as well? Agreed? Thank you very much. Right. Just before we move on to planning applications, we have to consider the appointment on the agenda to the Development Management Review Committee. As a result of the resignation of former Councillor David Fairweather, there's a vacancy on the DMRC, and this committee is asked to make an appointment as far as possible, giving effect to the principles of political balance. There are already 3 members from the ruling administration, along with Councillor Doran, and also, I'm forgetting who the other member is. Thank you, Councillor Gavin Nicholl, apologies. So we currently have 5 members on the DMRC. We can have 6. I'm going to ask the convener of the DMRC just to comment on that first of all before we do anything else.
Yeah, thanks, convener. The DMRC is like this committee is not a committee that breaks on political grounds. In fact, in the time I've been on the DMRC, I've usually agreed with, at least I can think of at least 2 Conservatives who've been on the over my period of time. We usually 90% of the time we have the same view, so it's not a political committee. The point I really wanted to make was, I think where you have a committee that is of nature going to make a number of potentially controversial calls, it would be wise to have an odd number of members on that committee so we get a clear division of vote, and we don't put the convener, i.e. myself, in the position of having to cast a casting vote, which obviously I don't think, I mean, I've done it before and I don't mind doing it, but we don't want to design a committee so that that is more probable. And given this is a non-political committee, the probability of having a 3-3 vote is quite high, I would suggest. So I think we should try and keep this committee an odd number of members to avoid that possibility. So I don't know what the others feel, but if minded, I would certainly be minded to raise an amendment to make that proposal.
Sorry, thanks, Councillor Duff. Sarah, do you want to just come in on that one?
Yes, thank you, convener. So in terms of our terms of reference, which were just approved in December from the scheme of governance, the DMRC shall consist of 6 members. So that would require an amendment to the scheme of governance rather than us doing that here today. So I would suggest that if members were minded to do that, that would be appropriate to do that at a future council meeting to consider that, excuse me, the membership. But as it stands, the scheme of governance dictates that DMRC shall consist of 6 members.
I'm correct in saying, though, that if this committee feels that happy to leave it at 5, we can leave it at 5.
That's correct.
Okay, that's fine. Have any other comments from the members? Councillor Furlingham.
Thank you, convener. Just what Mrs Forsyth has said there, and I take on what Councillor Duff has said, but I would like to propose Councillor Ian McLaren for the DMRC. Thank you.
Okay. In that case, I'm sorry. For Councillor Duff. Sorry, for Councillor McLaren. Apologies, Councillor McLaren. Councillor Clark, thank you for seconding that. Okay. So, is there any amendment to that? Councillor Duffy.
Yes, as I've said, I would propose that we should keep the committee at 5. When you have a panel of judges, it's always an odd number, and I think this is the same thing. It's quasi-judicial, and we shouldn't have somebody cut. We should. I mean, there's still always a possibility of a casting vote if a member is absent. Committee, but the likelihood of a casting vote is high, and I think in this case it is quite high. Over a 3-year period, we will have quite a number of tied votes, and I would like to avoid that. So I would propose that we stick with 5, and if that means we have to go back to full council to change the scheme of governance, then I think we should do that.
Yeah, I think actually we should consider the scheme of governance and preference on here, because that is what council agreed back in December to say 6. And if there's an applicant wishing to actually join that committee, then I'm not sure whether actually the amendment's relevant. Councillor Duff, actually, when now that I've heard about that, so I think I would suggest we go with simply with the motion on this, because I don't think we're actually going against council decision already by trying to do that. I think for a future council meeting we can aim to adjust it, but I think for now if we have a applicant under the basis of political balance, we should go ahead with that. So I'm happy to take a seconder from Councillor Duff, but I would warn about that. I think we should be following the scheme of governance. Sure.
I'll second Councillor Duff, but I would like to note that sometimes people are ill and can't make it, so sometimes we don't have full people. So sometimes it might be good, like cases that we've deferred to other committees to have somebody that can stand in, you know. So I don't know how it's going to work, but I think probably taking it back to full council for the decision is probably the best thing to do. Then everybody can have a say about it.
Yeah. Okay. As convener here, I'm actually going to propose that we just accept the motion here, because I'm really concerned that we actually have decided as a council already that the Development Review Committee should have 6 members on that. So I don't think it's appropriate to actually leave it as it is. I can understand entirely the benefit of having a majority vote on the DMRC. Councillor Brays.
Well, I'll second you, convener, but I do take Councillor Duff's point, and he is the convener of the DMRC. And it's not because of pressure being put on the convener of DMRC when it comes to a casting vote. It's simply the fact, as far as I see it, that one person is making that final decision, yes. 1 out of the 5. And that, I think, should be avoided. But because Councillor McLaren's keen, and because of the scheme of governance that lays this down, I'll second your motion, but it's maybe something that might be addressed. Thanks.
Yeah, I actually heartily agree with that, and I think being convener of the other DMRC when I done true, and I do agree with best of all, but in the circumstances we have to go back to council to amend that. So Councillor McLaren will just accept your appointment to the DMRC. Thank you very much. Sorry, agenda item 7 relates to report 151/24. This report deals with application 23/00783/ N, which seeks a prior approval for the siting and appearance of a 20-metre high monopole mast and antenna, etc., on land at the bus terminus adjacent to the former Ashleedy Hospital in Moneyfeith. Mr. Hunter, do you want to proceed from there?
Thank you, convener. As you've indicated, the first application we're looking at this morning relates to an application for prior approval for the erection of a telecommunications mast and its associated apparatus at Victoria Street, Moneyfeith. At this stage, draw members' attention to paragraphs 8.1 and 8.2 of the report that's before you. This application is unusual. It's for prior approval. It's not for planning permission. The planning permission is deemed to be approved by virtue of the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order. This is an application, it's a condition of that planning permission that is deemed to be granted that the applicant applies for prior approval for the siting and appearance of the mast. So the only matters that are relevant to consideration of the application that's before you are matters relating to the acceptability of the siting and appearance of the mast. You'll see from the papers before you, there are concerns raised in relation to a number of matters, all absolutely understandable. Those relate to the need for the development. There are a lot of concerns that relate to issues in relation to health impacts. But again, as you'll see from the report, a lot of those matters are not material to the consideration of this application. Specifically in relation to health, this is an extract from government guidance recently published on digital telecommunications, published December 2023, which very clearly states radio frequency radiation is controlled and regulated under separate legislation, and it should not be treated as a material consideration in the determination of these applications. There's reference to ICNIRP, that's the International Commission for Non-Ionising Radiation Protection. The applicant has submitted a declaration which confirms that the apparatus in question would comply with relevant standards, and that's as far as consideration of the matter lies for this committee. That information is all that this committee can consider in relation to health impacts. Moving on to the proposal itself, the general location of the application site to the east of Victoria Street. So you can see effectively the red line application site located just on the area of ground that we see comprising essentially a road island sitting between Victoria Street and a bus turning area to the east of the carriageway. Again, you'll see from the papers there's a reasonable amount of planning history relevant to this. Officers refused essentially an identical application to this in 2020 because they were not satisfied that appropriate consideration had been given to alternative sites. That decision was subject of appeal to Scottish ministers, and Scottish ministers allowed that appeal and granted prior approval. That prior approval has now lapsed, but again, as you'll see from the papers before you, the prior approval, the planning history, remains a material consideration that should be considered in the determination of the proposal. You're not bound by it. The passage of time is a relevant consideration, but the fact an appeal reporter has looked at it and said he finds it acceptable is something you should bear in mind as you consider the application. First of a few images that we have, this just shows the general location. You can see the road island that was referenced in the previous image, footway between that island and the carriageway of Victoria Street itself, trees that form a backdrop to the east, wrapping round the bus turning area, and we have hedges and trees to the west of the application site itself. Looking at the proposal, it relates to installation of a number of cabinets sitting close to the heel of the footway, and we have a telecommunications mast located within the central area of those cabinets. So mast itself located in this area. A drawing of the mast itself, it's 20 metres high, it's a substantial structure. The cabinets that you see sitting at the foot of it, again, substantial structures up to round about head height, 1.8 metres in height, the highest of these cabinets. So they are large cabinets sitting close to the footway and sitting adjacent to a substantial mast that you see in this image. Again, you get an impression of the height of the trees in the area, roughly 15 metres. You can see the height of the street light indicated in this area, lighting columns roughly 8 metres in height. And this is the hedge that runs down the western side of Victoria Street, in this image indicated to be 2 metres in height. You'll see from photographs it's actually a little bit higher than that. It's been allowed to grow, so it does sit a little bit higher than that at the present time. Just another image, this time looking south down Victoria Street. Considering relevant guidance published by Council and Government, the site has the advantage of the backdrop of trees. It's located where there are road junctions associated with the bus turning circle. There is other street furniture in the area, including the bus shelter, the 8 metre high poles, street lighting columns that you see running the length of the street. Notwithstanding that, the mast and the cabinets will clearly be an obvious feature in the street scene, and there would be, in my opinion, a detrimental impact on the street scene. In terms of masts in this type of location, Government has published guidance again, December 2023, which generally indicates where masts of this nature are located within residential areas. They should, as far as possible, be located away from direct views from main habitable room windows. So this just shows the location of the application site. We have properties to the west, property to the south, and the closest properties that we see to the east are the properties just identified by the cursor on the screen at the present time. And we'll look at each of those in a little bit of detail. Firstly, looking at the Lodge House, which sits to the south of the bus turning lay-by. This property is a Category C listed building. Lodge House formerly associated with Ashloody House. Its principal elevation is to the south, so it doesn't have main windows, main habitable room windows with views directly towards the mast. It does have windows that face in that direction, but its main windows are to the south. There is some intervening street furniture in the form of the bus shelter. The cabinets themselves largely screened by the wall that you see here. The upper sections, most of the mast is going to be visible from this property, but not from main habitable room windows, and it would be seen against the backdrop of the trees that enclose the turning circle. Looking to the east, two properties I would draw your attention to, one at the right-hand side of the screen that you can see here, and a second just in the area identified by the cursor. Property at the right-hand screen does not have main habitable room windows with direct views of the mast. The mast would be visible from the environs of the property, there's no question about that, and where it is seen, it would be a detrimental impact on amenity. The property at the left-hand side of the screen, its rear elevation, patio doors, etc., do have more direct views towards the mast and the associated apparatus, but you can perhaps see there's some filtering of those views by virtue of the vegetation, accepting that will change as throughout the season. But the vegetation is there, it would provide some filtering of views, and the separation distance that we're looking at there is in excess of 30 metres. Moving around, this is a bird's eye type image. It's of some vintage. You'll see it predates the construction of the houses within Ashloody House, but it does give an impression of the properties to the west of Victoria Street. So the two closest properties just identified by the cursor in this area, again, they don't have principal views from main habitable room windows towards the application site, which is located in this general area. Their main habitable room views are to the north and to the south, respectively. Also, in terms of this image, just draw your attention to the medical centre located a short distance to the south, and draw your attention to the extreme right-hand side of this image. So this is covering distance of about 300 metres, 150 metres to the south of the application site and 150 metres to the north of the application site. So this is the view from the south, from the proximity of the medical centre, and I would suggest by virtue of the road geometry and by virtue of the nature of landscaping in the surrounding area, once you've travelled that sort of distance, the mast will not be a particularly dominant or visible feature within the street scene. Similarly, moving to the north, round about 150 metres, a street view image looking in a southerly direction, application site located on the left-hand side of the roadway, round about the point that we see here, set back slightly on the road island, again by virtue of the geometry and by virtue of the landscaping. Not a hugely visible element in the street scene, by the point that we reach that distance. So in general terms, impacts reasonably localised. This is an image of a mast. This is elsewhere. This is a short distance to the west in West Ferry, in Broughty Ferry. This is a mast that was approved on appeal by Scottish ministers. There are some similarities with the mast we're looking at in this occasion. It's a streetworks mast. It's located adjacent to existing street infrastructure. It's close to a bus stop. There are listed properties to the south in the area that we see here. This is a conservation area. This is an area where there are special controls in place, but this is a site that a reporter has considered acceptable. The mast, more obvious in the street scene for a longer period, given, again, the geometry of the road. I should point out, this is a smaller mast. This mast is around about 15 metres in height, so about 5 metres smaller than the mast you've been asked to consider today. Again, you'll see from the report, the applicant has undertaken some analysis of alternative sites in the area. I think there are 20 or so sites in total. I'm not going to run through all of those sites, but there are a few in particular I'm going to pick out because they are of particular relevance in terms of policy consideration. And most importantly, I'm going to pick out this D1, which is the BT exchange on Hill Street. And it was failure to consider the potential for site share, mast share in association with that mast in particular that justified officers' previous refusal of this application. So if we look at the general location of the BT exchange, you can see predominantly surrounded by residential properties. You can see the mast sitting at the eastern extent of that site. Mast round about 16 metres or so in height. Now the applicant's clarified that for mast or for site share purposes, a separation distance of around about 30 metres is required between apparatus in order to avoid radio interference between the masts. And that's not readily feasible within this site. If we look at the mast itself, as I say, round about 16 metres in height, it's round about 17 metres from the closest residential property located to the east. And you can see fairly visible from that property at that distance. Applicant has indicated that mast share is not feasible, that a replacement mast would be required, and that replacement mast would need to be substantially taller than the mast that's there at the present time. And that would give rise to fairly significant impacts on the amenity of the closest property. And for that reason, they've discounted that particular site. I think that's reasonable. There are other sites, I've got a couple here, where interested parties have suggested or questioned why those sites have been discounted. And just as an example of the alternative sites that have been looked at, the amenity space that we see here to the north of Travebank Gardens is a location where the applicant has suggested the mast could potentially achieve the coverage that they're looking for. And in that instance, the mast would be less impactful on surrounding public roads. What I would draw attention to are the neighbouring properties to the north, east and south that would have fairly direct, including 2 second-storey windows looking towards the mast without the benefit of any backdrop. So benefits in terms of this site in that it wouldn't be as visible from the public road, but potentially more impactful on those that live round about. There are other sites where there would be similar characteristics to the application site. This is Grange Road and you can see there is an area of ground in here, which again, the applicant has suggested could potentially provide coverage that's required. Again, as with Victoria Street, it's a residential area. The mast would be visible from the public road. This site, as with many of the other sites that have been looked at, has the disadvantage that there is more direct impact on neighbouring properties than there would be associated with the site at Victoria Street. Officers have visited all of the sites that have been put forward as potential alternatives, and you'll see from the report there's no identified site that would give rise to materially reduced impact than the site that we're being asked to look at today. There's also mention in some of the correspondence about a mast located at the top of Victoria Street. So this is around about 400 metres north of the site you're looking at. Again, a mast that's around 20 metres in height. You can see residential properties with fairly direct view of that mast. This mast is operated by one of the applicants, I believe it's operated by EE, and that mast does not provide the coverage for the area that the applicant is seeking to provide the coverage for. So this does not provide an alternative that would provide the necessary coverage. Finally, just back to the application site, this is not a site without consequence. There is an impact on the street scene, but that impact is considered to be localised. This is a prior approval. The principle of a mast in this general area is approved by virtue of the development order, the permitted development order. What you're being asked to consider is whether this site, having regard to all circumstances, is acceptable. And you'll see it's recommended for approval, subject to the condition that's before you. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks again, Mr Hunter. That's great. We'll start off with members' questions of Council Officer. Do members have any questions for Mr Hunter? Sorry, Councillor Melville, we'll start with you.
Thanks. So first of all, it's a procedural one. I don't know, do we have anyone from the applicants here to address the committee today?
No, we don't. Not from the applicants, no.
Right, okay. Well, there's commentary in some of the objections, Mr Hunter, that the mast that this is seeking to replace, the 2015 decommissioned mast, has in fact already been replaced. I wonder if you could speak to that. That's the identified site at the top of Victoria Street that you spoke about last there.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, there's commentary in relation to that within the report. As I've indicated, the mast at the top of Victoria Street, as we understand matters, only serves EE. So it provides replacement coverage for the northern part of the area. When it was approved, the applicants had indicated they were keen to explore the potential for site share or mass share at the BT Exchange location, which we've looked at, for what I would suggest are quite reasonable, or on the basis of reasonable justification, they've explained why that is not now considered suitable. I think there has been a change in terms of the apparatus that's on the existing mast at that location over that period of time, so there has been some change of circumstance, but that's my understanding of the situation.
Thank you. Any other questions, Mr Hunter? I'm not seeing any. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So we will move now to list of speakers, and before we invite them across, I'm just let them know, understanding Order 12 of Angus Council, applicants, supporters and objectors are given the opportunity to address any points which they wish the committee to take into account in coming to its decision today. Speakers will normally be given 5 minutes only, I would remind speakers that members of this committee have already been provided with the opportunity to read all the submissions and thus may already be familiar with most of the points that will be raised by speakers today. So you have 5 minutes each speaker, and I will give notice when we reach 4 minutes to give you a minute to conclude. The first speaker is Mr. Gary Mannion. If you'd like to take your place, Mr. Mannion. At the end of your comment to Mr. Mannion, if you stay in the seat, because members may wish to ask you questions, okay? If you put your minute, thank you.
We do have a couple of, and the speaker after me is following on from what I've said, so it might make more sense to hold off any questions until, not that I'm passing the buck to her at all. Okay, good morning, committee members. We are here representing residents from Ashlew Grange and the surrounding area. Please note the residents are not opposed to the mast in principle. We just object to the particular siting of this mast. In the Council's latest report by Planning Service Lead Jill Patterson, she wrongly states that a court action against the Scottish ministers was dropped by the residents. MBNL, the applicants, asked us to settle the matter, but they have not yet met the terms of that legal agreement. Due to this, the legal matter is still actually ongoing. We now realise that they misled us in order to prevent the matter going to court. Ms Patterson's 2024 report and the decision is completely at odds with her colleague Mr James Wright's report and decision that's been mentioned from 2020. The only changes to the area within that time have been that it has actually become even more residential and there are now less trees due to storm damage. Both of these points are reasons for further objection to the mast as opposed to now approving it. In her report, Ms Patterson claims that the main concern in 2020, which resulted in rejection, was to do with alternative sites, but this is false. In Mr Wright's 2020 report, he mentions on 7 separate occasions that the main reason for declining the mast is due to the adverse effect on visual amenity, and only mentions about the lack of alternative proposed sites. He also mentions several times that the application is contrary to planning policy. Ms Patterson states in her report that the decision should only be based on the siting and design of the proposed mast. But James Wright makes the very same points for rejecting the mast in 2020, as he was of the opinion that it would be far too visually intrusive to the landscape, which is absolutely what we agree with. Ms Patterson offers no logical reasons as to why that opinion would suddenly have changed other than the DPEA appeal being upheld. The DPEA reporter placed a fixed period of approval on the decision. The decision has now expired and it cannot legally or morally be the basis for the committee's decision and should be treated as a brand new application. A vital component that was missing from Mr Wright's 2020 report was the mention of the fact that Angus Council had already approved the replacement mast in 2016 for the decommissioned mast that was previously situated in the area until 2015. MBNL did not disclose that the mast had already been replaced in 2016 anywhere in the principal application documentation. As there was a planning history section in Mr Wright's 2020 report, if he was acting with due diligence, he obviously should have questioned or pointed out that a replacement mast had already been granted by Angus Council. In 2016, the Council had suggested alternative sites for the replacement mast. They were also made aware that there would be a planned cell split between the 2016 site and upgrading the existing BT mast on Hill Street for EE to share this. Mr Wright did not query any of this with MBNL in 2020. As Mr Wright did not include any of this in the planning history section of his report, the DPE reporter was not aware that the replacement mast had already been approved by the Council. As the DPEA reporter mentioned in his reasoning for upholding the appeal that the mast was a replacement, his decision was absolutely affected by the lack of relevant information provided to him by the Council. The Planning Minister for Scotland confirmed to us it was the Council's duty to provide this kind of information for the reporter and that not including it may well have affected the outcome. As Ms Patterson's only basis for the current decision is the reporter's appeal outcome, this cannot be relied upon as it was influenced by errors from Angus Council which affected the reporter's reasoning. Even though these matters are from 2020, they are relevant to the current application as Ms Patterson has cited the appeal decision in her reasoning for approval, and that appeal was based on the 2020 application.
You've got 1 more minute, Ms Mannion.
Okay. I might if it's okay, might go very slightly over. We're representing over 100 people and we've tried to cram
Appreciate
off.
that, but with all due respect, we've had 162 pages from you already on this, so I think 5 minutes is
Okay,
sufficient.
appreciate that. Okay. When the application came back before Angus Council's Planning Department in 2023, we brought the matter of the existing mast and the planned cell split to Mr Wright. He claimed in a phone call to us on the 20th of January that he was raising these questions we asked with MBNL now that they had been brought to his attention, which meant that he'd been unaware of these points in 2020. Due to how misleading MBNL were with that information they presented, we completely understand how Mr Wright was misled, but the error was on the Council's part. Also included in the DPEA reporter's reasoning for upholding the appeal was that the Council had failed to suggest alternative sites for the mast. Councils often work with applicants to find alternative suitable sites, and Angus Council had actually done so in 2016 with the replacement mast, but chose not to do so in 2020. We asked Mr Wright directly in writing on 7 separate occasions whether he had been aware in 2020 that the decommissioned mast had already been replaced in 2016 when he compiled his report. Each time he refused to answer. We asked Ms Patterson, but she also refused to answer the direct question. Our MSP also tried to investigate this, but the Council refused to answer this question again. The residents can only assume that the Council do not wish to be accountable for this error because they know it affected the appeal.
Okay, Mr Mann, I'm going to ask you to finish there. You've gone past your time already, if that's okay. So if you'd actually finish there, do members have any questions for Mr Mannion this morning before we hear from the next objector? No?
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Mr Mannion. We'll move on to Ms Gillian Mannion.
Convener, can we ask that the camera is switched on in County Hall because we can't see anything online?
Okay, sorry about that, Ms Councillor. We can see it all here, so Councillor Gall, can you see what's the camera for County Hall?
Yes, I can see everything.
Okay, Councillor Stewart, I think that's localised to yourself in that case, I'm afraid. So I'm able to carry on.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Ms Mannion, do you want to take your seat, please? And same again, Ms Mannion, I'll give you, after 4 minutes, 1 minute notice, okay?
Yes, can I, sorry, can I just ask that if we do go slightly over, it would only be by a little bit, and because Mr Melvin is also one of the residents here, would it be all right if Mr Melvin was to use some of his time to finish what I have to say?
Well, I'll follow what I've said already to you. We've had pages and pages of all of this. I don't think an extra minute's going to make any difference. So initially I'm going to keep you to 5 minutes, and then if it's relevant, I may let you go on a little bit. That's under my auspices. So regardless of what Mr Melvin's going to say, I don't know what he's going to say.
No, I understand that. It's just, it's a very complex matter.
It is,
and we
we've
have
had all the papers on that. I think 5 minutes is enough really to do a summary of what is required. We've already had all the opportunity for this. So I think off you go, and I'll give you 5 minutes. I'm leaving it at that.
Sorry, can I just say that we haven't had a chance, though, to respond to the latest report. While we've been able to put in notes of everything so far, the report was only issued days ago, and we've only had 3 days to look at it. So that's why the response to that report is what we haven't had a chance to do yet. So I'm aware that you've had things from us before, but we haven't had a chance to do that yet.
Sorry, I'm leaving it as it is. I'm sticking with the 5 minutes. I say if you're making relevant points, I may allow you to go over, but I will stop. But you should limit your actual comments to that 5 minutes so perhaps do a very quick summary of them and pull out the bits that are the most relevant. I'll let you start off. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, committee members. There are many points in Ms Patterson's 2024 report where she oversimplifies points in order to support her decision. She does not mention anywhere in the report that the Council were misled by MBNL in application documents. Surely there must be awareness and repercussions for applicants who try to mislead local authorities to obtain approval. Even when asked directly in an email exchange by Mr Wright a few months ago what happened to the planned Hill Street mast upgrade, MBNL refused to answer. The only reference Ms Patterson makes to the existing replacement mast that Angus Council already approved in 2016 is in point 811, where she claims that issues regarding the need for development are not relevant to the consideration of this application. If the Planning Authority are aware that a company has claimed that 2 separate masts are sole replacements for a decommissioned one, then obviously this is relevant to the consideration of the application. Otherwise, telecommunications companies can endlessly request replacements for singular masts. Ms Patterson also claims in regards to the previous planned BT Exchange upgrade that the applicant indicates that this had been discounted for a number of reasons. The sudden issue of technical constraints mentioned by Ms Patterson were not a problem in 2016 when the site was fully explored by EE and plans made to upgrade it. The claims that the height of an upgrade at BT Exchange would need to be considerably higher are mere conjecture, as no evidence has been provided for this. Operators Vodafone and O2 currently share the BT Exchange mast, yet it is only 16 metres in height. Even if a height extension of some degree was required, local and national policy is for mast sharing. Therefore, a slight increase in height is favourable over an additional mast. The reason that MBNL refused to answer what happened to the previously planned upgrade is likely to be to do with cost rather than practicality. Excuse me. Ms Patterson makes little mention of the fact that the appeal from the DPA, which she bases her decision on, has expired. The only time she mentions it is to claim that case law states appeal decisions should be taken into account even if they are expired, but this is incorrect. When asked for further details, the Planning Department cited a 30-year-old English legislation to Scots law referring to an expired garage application. The case had nothing to do with telecommunications masts that had already been replaced. In later case law, a judge actually referred to the case Ms Patterson mentioned and stated regarding consideration of expired appeal decisions, this guidance simply cannot be applied by rote. After we consulted with legal planning experts, they could find no evidence of appropriate case law that supports Ms Patterson's reasoning. In summary, there are many factors that provide justification for refusal of the proposed mast based on siting and design alone. The biggest contributors to this being that there is already a replacement mast nearby, and the effect on visual amenity and character landscape is too vast, as supported by Mr Wright's 2020 report. Examining buildings or structures where the mast could be placed has not been explored by the applicants or Angus Council. As per local and national policy, mast sharing should take place wherever possible, and it is possible in this case, as admitted by MBNL and evidenced by the 2016 application, which planned a researched upgrade at the BT Exchange site. 3 masts in one very residential area, which is the entrance to a village, on a main roadway and all next to a school, is not fair or appropriate. Already having 2 is enough, but to add a 3rd would obviously stop residents enjoying their homes and outdoor community, which infringes upon their human rights. EE already claimed they were replacing the decommissioned mast in 2016. Companies cannot continually ask for more replacements for one mast, or where would it end? The proposed placement of this mast would be in direct views of several houses and an obtrusive feature in the landscape that has been carefully preserved for generations due to its character. There is a viable site in the town centre and on a brownfield site that would be in keeping with local and national policy, and these should be sought first. Alternatively, there is a preferable site that does not have another mast nearby and could be secluded on wasteland with screening from trees. There is also support from other residents for alternative mast sites to be selected in order to improve phone signal in their problematic areas. A reminder of the facts. MBNL purposely misled Angus Council in 2020 and 2023 and the DPAA to obtain approval. Angus Council's errors contributed to the appeal decision. The reporter's decision was flawed on several counts. It is local and national policy for mast sharing to take place. The existing replacement mast could be shared by EE and 3, and the BT Exchange site could be upgraded for all operators to share. There are several alternative sites in Moneyfeith that are less affected than the proposed site, as they do not already have any masts in the area. The decommissioned mast has already been replaced in the Ashludy area. The appeal decision for this proposal has expired. Ms Patterson's report is a complete contradiction of Mr Wright's previous report and provides no sound reasoning for her decision. Angus Council's current planning department have refused to answer directly whether they missed the decommissioned mast had already been replaced in 2016. This current application should be treated as a new application, which should also be rejected for the same reason that it was in 2020, along with the fact that it is not a replacement for a decommissioned mast, but is an additional new one. If the committee approves the decision today, they will be supporting Angus Council's errors and MBNL's underhand conduct. The residents at Ashludy and the surrounding area should not have to bear the burden of 3 masts in one street when there are other suitable sites in the village. It is imperative in the interests of fairness and transparency that the committee declines the approval of the proposed mast site.
Appreciate that. Thanks very much indeed. You want to just remain in your seat just now? Any questions for Mr and Ms Mannion? Councillor Durnell.
Thanks, Ms Mannion. Thank you for bringing your report. This is a pretty straightforward question. Why do you think the company would want to put a mast where it is when there's all this controversy? I mean, you've said there's different sites they could have used. Would they not have like a person that goes about with a signal locator or some gadget that tells them the best place to put a mast? Is that not the reasoning behind why they want to put it there? Because it seems a bit strange that they want to put it there just for the sake of it, to be honest.
The sites that they've actually now investigated, they didn't investigate off their own back. So we had to ask them to go and investigate these sites. At first, they told us that those sites wouldn't give good coverage. Then when they were challenged further, they admitted that actually all of those sites would provide good coverage. To me, the reason that they want to put the masts where they do is to do with cost. It's just much cheaper to do it. They've started this process, they've got so far into it. They would have to start the whole thing again if they go to a different area. And where they would likely meet some objection, it would not be as strenuous as this because we already have the replacement mast where we are. So I think it's a lot to do with cost because there's been articles, over the last few years about mast sharing and how much it actually costs, and that, the people who own the area, in this case BT, would charge for the operators to go on. So they looked at the BT exchange, and that was their plan. They'd researched that. They'd identified that in 2016 as EE, as the best way forward. And then there is no trail after they applied for certain permits to put EE equipment on there. Mr. Wright from the council actually challenged that and said, what happened to this? And they refused to answer. So we don't actually know if they have antenna on that mast right now because they haven't told us. But if they do, they could then accommodate the 3 equipment there. But again, they would be charged more to do this. So as I said, I think this is about cost as opposed to anything else, and that they're so far into the process.
Is there any other questions from Ms Mannion? No? Okay, thank you, Ms Mannion. I appreciate it's an emotive matter, so thanks for your time this morning. Mr Melvin. Thanks, Mr Melvin. Yeah, again.
So mine is a very brief statement, so thanks for your time this morning. So I think I just want to urge you to help us deny this application. And the reasons for that is that this saga has gone on for over 4 years now. So for the last 4 years, everybody in development has had a significant impact on their lives, their plans for their lives. There are old people who are genuinely worried about the health implications. And whether you can consider that as an application or not, then you must have a moral compass that says, do you want elderly people sitting worried about the fact that an approval of this will make them sit and go to bed worried at night? So there is a moral obligation there for you guys to consider this as well. But the ask is that we do understand the requirement for mobile telecommunications, right? And what we want is to work with the operators to help them find a location for this. And you guys denying this pushes them to the table to help them engage with us. Because at this point in time, they haven't engaged with us. There's been no meaningful conversations with us. Every site that's been there, we've put forward. The question you asked around signal checking, you go onto EE's website and the applicant, who I still don't know who the applicant is because they've gone, they've folded, there's new applicants. There was someone who used to work at a company, became the applicant. So but if you go onto their website, on the sales side of their website, they have 100% coverage. So there is no need for this mast. They have coverage there now. If you want to go and buy a mobile phone from EE and you live in that address, you will be given 100% coverage. So why do they need a mast? So I can only ask that. I know you can't, your terms of reference are quite tight. I can only ask that as human beings that you give us the right to try and push them to talk to us because we can help them. That's it.
Any questions for Mr. Sorry, Councillor Doran, do you want to address a question or?
Yeah, although my question is not maybe directly to the representatives who just spoke, it's relating to the fact that some of the content that was in those representations there, and where that leads us as councillors regarding this decision.
Yeah, okay, Councillor, I was actually going to comment on that and saying a lot of that comment was not appropriate to this. This is actually, as has been brought up already, this is purely for us to actually identify whether this is the siting of this mast is appropriate or not to go back over previous legal matters. And a lot of that was opinion as well, so it's not for the council to address that at all, and certainly not at this Development Standards Committee meeting. Okay. Right, moving on, I'll move to...
Convener, just before we move on, Councillor Stewart's having an issue with his camera. He was going to leave the meeting and rejoin. If we could just give him 2 minutes to do that.
Yep, happy to do that. We'll just take a couple of minute recess from the meeting just to allow Councillor Stewart to try and rejoin. Can you hear us okay, Councillor Stewart? He's still there, but... I don't think he must be there. He must be there because he's showing.
Councillor Stewart, can we just ask you to leave the meeting and rejoin, please?
That's him left now, so let's just see if he's going to get back in. If everybody just bears with us for a couple of minutes.
Stop the stream. Stream.
Welcome back, everyone. I think I might just ask, further to my comment to Councillor Dorden, just previous to the recess, that if whether Mr Hunter would like to answer respond to any of these comments that are in the objectors' decision comments. Would you be for that?
Happy to do that, Convener. A few issues have been raised regarding the accuracy of the report. Draw members' attention to paragraph 4.3 of the report, which deals with the legal challenge. Now, that sets out, as we understand it, the factual position in relation to that challenge, and as a matter of fact, the reporter's decision has not been quashed. That is a matter of fact. There is reference to the undertaking between the applicant and the neighbours. That's within the report, but as a matter of fact, the reporter's decision has not been quashed. There is case law from as recent as 2019, which indicates that a lapsed appeal decision remains a material consideration. That's an English case, but it's an appeal court case, and it's a generally accepted principle that in relation to planning law, where the two systems are fairly similar, the principles of one jurisdiction will apply so far as they are relevant to the jurisdiction of another administration. So I would suggest that the appeal decision is a material consideration. It's something that if you were minded to refuse this application, you would, in the words of the court, have to grasp the intellectual needle and address why you think the reporter, or why you disagree specifically with the reporter's findings. There's reference to the mast at the top of Victoria Street, which we've seen, and whether it's a replacement or it's not a replacement. Officer view is that's not really material, because that relates to the question of need. And need is not one of the things that you're considering today. There is suggestion that the reporter was unaware of that. That is factually incorrect. The applicant's justification for that 2016 mast was provided to the reporter by one of the objectors to that mast, to the 2020 mast. So it was a matter that was before the reporter. The reporter was aware of the presence of that mast, and he was aware that the mast at the top of Victoria Street had previously been approved as a part replacement for coverage in this area. That was a matter that he had full knowledge of.
No. Down to members now to continue with this. Right. First of all, members, we'll move to comments. Can I start with any particular member on this? Councillor Dunno.
Okay, I've read through all the application and note. The problem I have with this is usually when we do for solar panels, etc., we get really in-depth reasoning and why the specific site is being used, etc. I can't see in this report a specific site saying why this site has to be the place it has to be. There isn't anything coming back saying, well, we've tested this site and we can't do it because of the trees we've tested. I need some kind of explanation of why this signal has to be good from this specific site. And I can't get that in the report unless I've missed it. But that is what my bugbear is. I'm not taking into consideration then maybe saying it's cost or whatever. But I would think as a company, they need to have a really good reasoning of why that particular pavement and not 100 metres up the road has to be right there. And I cannot get that in this report. So that's my thoughts on it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dunmill. Any other members with any comments at this stage? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Dorn, I keep forgetting to look at the screen. Go ahead.
Thank you. And yeah, I think this is it's a very complex case that we're taking into account here, and I think there are a few things that don't work together so well. So part of it is what we can make a decision on as councillors, and this often comes up, what's within our remit to consider and reasoning behind we might support or go against an application. One of the big things to me is around the impact on amenity and visual impact. That is being addressed by both council officers and within the reporter's report, and also noted that that is an issue for this. So that's a big one for me, and that sits with us as councillors, as representatives of the local area, to assess whether or not we think this impacts significantly on the amenity. And then the other one is relating to the kind of impact and material consideration of the reporter's decision. And that ends with a conclusion that says the benefits of the proposal outweigh the adverse impact on amenity, but it's not clear what the benefit is within the context of what Councillor Durno has just mentioned as well. So that's another challenge that I have relating to this application as well.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Dorn. Any others? Councillor Melville?
Yeah, I have to say I agree wholeheartedly with what Councillor Doran has just said. I think in terms of the amenity impacts, my own view is that is a serious impact, and we've obviously heard the strength of feeling about the impact on amenity from local residents as well. That is something that we as councillors need to determine. Obviously, people will have their view, but I do think the impact on amenity with this is quite significant.
Thanks, Councillor Melville. Any others? Councillor Fotheringham.
Thank you, Convener. Just to concur and agree with my colleagues, Councillor Dornan and Councillor Melville, that this is a detrimental impact in my view. I think it is the wrong site. I think it should go back and be looked at another site for this. The representatives here today are not objecting to a mast. They're just saying it's in the wrong place, and I agree with what Councillor Dunlow has said. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Fotheringham. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, everybody. This has been really quite difficult to listen to because I listened at the start, read all my papers as we do, listened to the in-depth planning considerations. Thank you again. And I thought at the start, well, yep, it's quite contained. I'll get this. The instructions are there. But as time has gone on, and as a councillor, I cannot ignore the strength of feeling. And I've been in lots of positions in a planning career, and I've never ignored that once, and I certainly can't bring myself to ignore it. Given what I've just said, I've looked at the strategic bit of it and listened to our planner, but I think we have to take that into consideration. That's heartfelt, and it's also eloquently brought to us. I've ignored all the seemingly, yes, heartfelt, but maybe opinionated bit of it. And I can understand why that was done like that. But I can't ignore people living there coming to us with this. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Councillor Duff.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I think I don't doubt there is a lot of local opposition to this. However, the previous decision by the reporter is a material consideration, and that explains the difference in the 2020 report by Mr. Wright and the more recent report by Ms Patterson, because I think the experience tells me that a view of a reporter does then colour the decisions of the local planners, because the reporter has gone into it in great detail, and we don't like our decisions being overturned by other parties. So I think it's no surprise that this time we've taken on note, we're noting, or our arguments are different because of the reporter. Now, clearly, if we refuse this, it will be appealed again to the reporter, and given that it's been approved once before by the reporter, it will almost certainly be approved again on appeal. So for me, that's not a very sensible position. I think a lot of the objections, we heard a lot of comments which were speculation. You know, it is quite complicated, but I have to be honest with you. There is one of these poles in North Esk Road in Montrose, and to be quite honest, you don't notice it now. It's just part of the street furniture. So I think there's over much concern about this, and I think we all use mobile phones. For me, they're a fact of life, and I think I would certainly approve the application.
Councillor Brace.
Yes, thanks, Convener. I do take great cognizance of the objections, and we had that one regarding health impacts. And that is a concern, not because there might actually be health impacts, but it does cause worry to people that there might be, and there's nothing we can do about that, nothing at all. I'm going to base my decision, as I'm required to, on what is relevant to this committee and what is a material consideration. The appeal decision is, in my opinion, certainly a material consideration. Thank you.
Okay, I think if that's all comments, I will sum this up. If everybody could just bear with me, because I think this one is quite a detailed application. We all read through 300 odd pages on this, and there's a lot to consider. So if you just bear with me. This is an application seeking prior approval for the siting of a 20-metre high monopole, mast incorporating dishes, antennae, etc. A previous similar application was refused by Angus Council in May 2020 on the basis that the siting and appearance of the mast would, quote, not minimise impact on visual amenity or impacts on the character or appearance of the surrounding area, contrary to policy TC13 of the Angus Local Development Plan, and that the applicant had not adequately demonstrated why other alternative sites, including mast share, had been discounted. However, in my opinion, having read through everything and listened again today, I don't think anything has changed significantly since the concerns of Angus Council in 2020. To be frank, when first presented with sight of this application, I had misgivings immediately. I recognise that the 2020 decision by Angus Council was appealed to Scottish ministers who also had concerns of the adverse impact on general visual amenity, but not enough concern to justify dismissing the appeal due to substantial support from national policies and the Local Development Plan. Of course, since 2020, we now have National Planning Framework 4 adopted in February 2023. NPF 4 Policy 24 deals with digital infrastructure and seeks to roll it out across Scotland for the benefit of communities, and I have no issues with this. But we are here today to consider the siting and the look of the proposed infrastructure, not the principle of it, nor the need for the development, despite the applicant indicating that additional infrastructure is required to provide coverage due to the removal of a 25-metre mast, once situated in the grounds of the former Ashleigh Hospital. However, since then, a 20-metre mast has already been erected 420 metres north of this application site and next to an SSEN power substation. This, I believe, still provides opportunities. So I'm not convinced that there are not other sites more appropriate which would have less impact on general and residential amenity, despite council officers' opinion, undoubtedly having worked hard to visit the sites shown on the presentation today. We have a substantial list of objections received. Yes, many of them are from one party, apparently writing on behalf of many other residents in the community. Regardless, I still feel there is some merit in their objections, and I say this because, in the words of planning officers, 1, the proposed site is not a preferred location in terms of the Council's planning advice note, and the mast would have some impact on the visual amenity. 2, there are listed buildings in the vicinity, is detrimental to the street scene, and to be aware that trees in full bloom are fine, but when they shed their leaves, views of the mast would be exposed significantly. Apparently, there is established case law to the effect that a previous appeal decision can be a material consideration by the determiner of this application. Case law also confirms that this includes appeal decisions that may have expired. We are not bound by this earlier decision, but we are required to give reasons for any departure from this decision. Well, frankly, these could include the approval granted by the previous appeal has expired, additional houses have been erected in the area over the last few years, and there are alternative sites that require further more exhaustive consideration, in my opinion. I do note that other similar masts have been approved on appeal in conservation areas, so if this is rejected today, it is likely it will go to appeal, and that appeal may be successful, and further I do note Councillor Duff's comments this morning as well. However, to conclude, rarely do I differ in my opinion from my professional colleagues, but I'm minded to refuse this application, and I do so considering primarily the terms of policies 4 and 14 of NPF 4, policies DS3, DS4, PV5, PV6, PV8 and PV9 of the ALDP, Angus Local Development Plan. So rather than approve this application, I'll leave it to the applicant to pursue it further if they so wish with Scottish ministers. So I'm moving refusal of this application. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Fotheringham.
Yes, Convener, I concur wholeheartedly with what you've said. We've listened today. As you say, we've had hundreds of pages of information. This is clearly the wrong site, and other sites need to be investigated. So I'm more than delighted to second your motion.
Thank you very much. Do amendment from anyone? Councillor Duff.
Yeah, I will go with the views of the officers who've obviously spent a lot of time looking at this. They have looked at alternative sites and they can't find an alternative site. And I think you really have to look at the appeal decision, which I think is a significant material consideration. I see little point in us refusing it and it going back to the reporters, who will almost certainly take the same decision as the first reporter. So I would move an amendment that we approve the application.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. A seconder? Councillor Brace.
I'll second that.
Yes.
Okay, we're there, Tom. Mr. Councillor Stewart. Thank you. Councillor Brace is seconded. Thank you. So we have a motion and we have an amendment. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Convener. The motion by yourself, seconded by Councillor Fotheringham, is to refuse the application for the reasons as outlined by yourself. The amendment by Councillor Duff, seconded by Councillor Brace, is to approve the application for the reason and subject to the conditions as detailed in the report. Please vote motion or amendment. Convener.
Motion.
Councillor Durno.
Motion.
Councillor Beattie.
Motion.
Councillor Brace.
Amendment.
Councillor Clark.
Motion.
Councillor Doran.
Motion.
Councillor Duff.
Amendment.
Councillor Fotheringham.
Motion.
Councillor Gall.
Amendment.
Councillor McLaren.
Motion.
Councillor Melville.
Motion.
Councillor Stewart.
Amendment.
The motion is carried by 8 votes to 4, Convener.
Thank you. So planning application number 23/00783 PRIORN is hereby refused, subject to the conditions stated. Thank you everyone for the full debate on this planning application, and thank you to our speakers as well today. Right, we will move on to agenda item 8. Apologies, sorry, Councillor Clark. Sorry? Absolutely, we'll recess for 5 minutes, sufficient? Thank you.
John, can we stop the live stream, please?
Okay. Okay, thanks, folks. Just after that short recess, we'll move on to agenda item 8. That's report 152/24 for, this is a report dealing with the planning application submitted on behalf of Berry Hill Solar Farm Limited, and which we have heard in the past. This is an application made under Section 42 of the Town and County Planning Act subject to different conditions than those attached to the original planning application. I'll let Mr. Hunter carry on with this one.
Thank you again, Convener. This is another slightly unusual application. It's, as you've indicated, an application made under Section 42 of the Planning Act, and consideration of applications of this nature are limited to the question of the conditions that should be attached to the planning permission. So in this case, we have an existing planning permission which was granted by Scottish ministers following planning appeal in September 2022. And that permission can lawfully be implemented up to September 2025. So irrespective of any decision taken on the application today, this application can be implemented in its current form. What the applicant is seeking is an extended period of 2 years to allow implementation of the planning permission so that the implementation and completion of the physical works aligns with the grid connection. And you'll see from the report before you that the principle of such change is supported by NPF 4 and by the circular on planning conditions. I don't want to spend too much time looking at the site because the details of the proposal have not changed, and I am very aware that many of the members around this table have sat through presentations in the past in relation to this. I'm equally aware there are some new members who will be less familiar with the site. So just to give some context to the proposal, I will run through a few slides. Application site itself, you can see outlined in red, sits to the south of the Piper Dam Resort, to the west of Liff, and we have the A90 located a distance to the south. The green line that you see on the map identifies the construction access route to the site, which would be taken from the A90. That route goes through Perth and Kinross, and it extends into Angus as it heads towards the application site. And you will see there are conditions attached to the appeal decision and recommended to be retained as part of the papers before you, which control traffic management and seek to secure improvement to the local road network. In terms of the detail of the proposal itself, again, you can see Piper Dam located just to the north of the application site, and you can see the blue hatching, which identifies the location of the solar panels themselves. So sizable development, generating just under 50 megawatts of power. That's equivalent to roughly the electricity needs of around about 12,500 homes. So a significant contribution towards renewable energy generation in the area. And again, members are very aware, principle of this type of development attracts additional support by virtue of the policies contained in NPF 4. Again, you'll see the conditions before you. Conditions consistent with those attached by the reporter require details of the precise layout of the site, the equipment within the site to be submitted for subsequent approval. There are also conditions that require the site to be decommissioned and restored at the end of its operational period. That operational period is 40 years from the day electricity is first generated. There is no intention to amend that time period as part of this application. It's only the period for implementation of the permission itself. So no increase in the duration of time the development would be on site. We also have conditions that seek to mitigate impact on landscape, requirement for precise details of landscaping. You can see the green areas identified on the plans before you. We have a residential property just located in the general proximity of the cursor, an open area for biodiversity enhancement proposed to be retained in front of that property, and fairly substantial landscaping within and around the perimeters of the site. And again, conditions attached, consistent with those attached by the reporter, that require the details of those mitigation measures, the enhancement measures, the landscaping to be submitted to and approved by the planning authority. If we move across to the west of the application site, we have a core path that runs from Piper Dam in a southerly direction, adjacent to and through the solar development. And again, we have a condition which requires an access management plan, so proposals to minimise impact on that core path during the construction and operational phases of the development. The condition that's there is consistent with the condition attached by the appeal reporter, and that is reproduced as a proposed condition in relation to the recommendation before you. Just an image that gives an impression of the indicative landscaping that's proposed. So you can see reasonable space provided between zones of panels, which reflects historic field patterns and allows for reasonably substantial planting to help break up the overall mass of the development. And again, the detail of that to be addressed through the conditions that are proposed in association with the proposal. There are neighbouring properties, as I've referenced, including properties to the south. You can see some of those are reasonably close to the development, and you will see that we have conditions 11 to 16 in the proposed conditions before you that seek to regulate potential amenity impacts. And in general terms, those reflect those attached previously by the reporter. There are two notable changes, and those relate to conditions dealing with noise. So there is an amendment to condition 13, which seeks to reflect current best practice from our environmental health colleagues, which imposes a slightly different noise limit in relation to the proposal. It seeks to ensure some betterment for those people closest to the development, having regard to current best practice. And there is an additional condition, which is condition 16, which seeks to impose a requirement on the applicant to undertake noise investigation complaint. Again, that's an additional condition that reflects the Council's current practice. But just to summarise, this is not an opportunity to revisit the principle of the development. This is only opportunity to reconsider the conditions that the permission is subject to. The justification for the extended period for implementation of the planning permission is to allow that to align with the grid connection consent which the applicant is pursuing. That's reasonable. It's a planning justification. The proposal remains consistent with policy. The conditions remain consistent with policy, and the application is recommended for approval for the reasons before you. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks, Mr Hunter. So questions for Mr Hunter first. Councillor Durnell.
Thanks, Convener. Would there be a possibility that the applicant could probably start planting some of the border trees now if he's not going to be doing it for 2 years? Because that would give 2 years of a chance for the trees to grow a bit. You know, that would speed things up a bit for the people around about, you know, the screening. Would that be?
Apologies, Councillor Dunn, cut you off there. My understanding is that the applicant intends to undertake some advanced planting, but the applicant, I believe, is in attendance, and that's a question you might want to direct towards them.
Sorry. Yeah, that's the applicant.
He is actually going to address, so
Yeah.
can we do it that time?
Sorry, let's leave. Yeah, that's your question for just now. We'll deal with that. Any other questions, Mr. Hunter? Oh, apologies. Heather, I keep missing you. Sorry, Councillor Doran, go ahead.
Mine related and partly to that question as well, but also just to comment on some of the letters have mentioned that obviously the technology relating to solar is advancing very rapidly, and so we're then approving something that could be built many years down the line after it was approved. And I just wanted to hear from Mr. Hunter around that. I know it's mentioned within the documents, but I wanted to address that question directly around the council's response to that.
Thank you, Councillor Doran. To be very clear, the applicant is proposing no alteration to the equipment that was considered by this committee and by the appeal reporter in 2020. So the detail of the proposal in terms of the equipment that's proposed is identical. As I've emphasised, the applicant could implement the current permission immediately. If they propose different technology, if they propose to increase the capacity of the development, that's a different matter. That may well require a different application. And if the output from the development exceeds 50 megawatts, the consenting process for the application would be different. It would be an application that would be considered by the Energy Consents Unit, Scottish Government under the Energy Consents Unit. So Planning Authority only deals with applications up to or below 50 megawatts.
Thanks, Councillor Doran. Mr. Hunter, any other questions for Mr. Hunter from anyone? Okay, I've just got one, and it may actually be also for Mr. Singh as well on this one. I'm just looking back to something. Sorry, I lost my notes on this that I'd written already, so I'm flying by the seat of my pants on this one. It's just on relation to extensions generally on this, and I'm referring back to. I understand that from, if it's correct, that from October to any applications granted after October 2022 can be extended under section 42 of the Act, I believe. Am I right in saying that only, or what happens as this was granted under appeal in September 22? Prior to that, I understood that that couldn't be varied. Am I right in saying that, or have I misunderstood?
I think there's a misunderstanding in relation to that, convener. Any time limit condition that's imposed on a planning permission can be varied. In this case, the reporter explains why he attached the time limit condition, and that was because he was required to do so because it was a planning permission that was granted for a temporary period of time. So the planning permission is limited to 40 years whilst the development is operational. And in that instance, the terms of the Act meant that a condition had to be imposed. If the condition wasn't imposed, it was dealt with by a direction, but the direction limiting the time period didn't apply where it was a permission for a limited duration. So the reporter explains why he's attached the time limit condition. The time limit condition is something that features in his decision, and therefore it is something that can be varied under section 42.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Complicated, but hopefully helpful.
And just as one thing on this as well, am I right in saying, because this planning application is excellent and still in place, that the applicant could simply go along and put a spade in the ground now, and that would start the application off properly?
You are absolutely correct, convener. The applicant would be entitled to undertake material operations, and doing so would effectively safeguard their planning permission. The 40-year duration period where the development has to be removed does not commence until electricity is first generated. So they could start works now, pause, and then recommence closer to the time when they have the grid connection.
Right, thanks for that, Mr Hunter, just for clarifying that. Okay, and no more questions, Mr Hunter, I don't believe. So in that case, we can move to, we have one speaker on this, Mr Speedy, who is online. Mr Speedy, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you, Mr Speedy. Again, I know you were probably listening to the earlier application as well, and you'll have heard that I will permit 5 minutes for your comment, and I'll let you know when 4 minutes have passed, so you can a minute to wrap up. Okay, and then after that, there may be questions by members for you and for you to say online. Okay? Go ahead.
Right, good morning. The Scottish Government published a paper in October 22 on time limits to planning applications. Developments must be begun not later than the expiration of either 3 years from the date of grant of permission or other such period as the planning decision maker may specify when granting permission. The applicant sought and was refused a 5-year term to begin the development at Berry Hill at the planning application stage. When this planning application was eventually approved on appeal, the first of many conditions stipulated by the reporter was very clear: no ifs and no buts, but the development was subject to a time limit of 3 years. In making this application for an extension of a further 2 years, the applicant is quite simply in breach of the appeal's decision, a decision which neither I nor any other third party is entitled to challenge. In an article published in the local press on 10th May, a statement attributed to the Angus Planning Department reads, quote, "An extended time period for implementation of the planning permission is justified to align with the anticipated availability of a grid connection. There are no material considerations to justify refusal." I would make the following observation on these statements. Availability of a grid connection is only, quote, "anticipated, not definite." Would not the precedent of this extension result in further extensions being requested and granted should this anticipated grid connection not be secured by 2027? I believe there could be significant material considerations to justify refusal. Developments in solar technology in terms of the efficiency of materials could by 2027 result in the proposed site having the potential to produce a significantly higher energy output than the agreed 49.9 megawatts. As such, this would result in a significant change to the Berry Hill design and layout if the energy output were to be limited to the agreed number. I can't quite understand how the planning department would disagree with this probable consequence of a time extension. I would also wish to draw your attention to an article written by Gordon Clark, a planning lawyer, which was published in May 2023. He's an associate of the global firm DLA Piper. He advises on planning and infrastructure for all types of development, including renewable energy schemes. The article is available online. Time limits for planning permission in Scotland in Section 42 of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997. The section of this article relevant to this planning application reads, direct quote, "In the circular world of the Scottish planning system, following the latest reforms and the implementation of Section 32 of the Planning Scotland Act 2019 on 1 October 2022, duration of planning permissions is once again regulated by condition. Any permission granted after this date can have its duration varied by use of Section 42 of the 1997 Act. Crucially, though, permissions granted between 3rd August 2009 and 1st October 2022 remain subject to a time limit direction and are incapable of being extended using Section 42. The applicant for this development is seeking an extension of 2 years using that Section 42 of the 1997 Act for a permission granted on the 21st of September 2022. This seems not to be permissible under planning law, given that this date falls between the period 3rd August 2009 to 1st October 2022. I believe that the above observations, information and comments need to be taken into account by the committee. At the very least, I believe that the committee needs to verify the content of Gordon Clark's statements and to reach its decision in the light of these. If Gordon Clark's legal opinion is correct, Angus Council does not have the power to grant an extension of time under the terms set out in the report. Thank you for listening.
Oh, okay. I'm just going to say 1 more minute, Ms. Speedy. Thanks very much for being so brief within your time. Okay. We also have the applicant, which I'll hear in a moment, but just in response to your points made, could I just again, between Mr. Singh and Mr. Hunter, just address that one final point, or that regarding the date of when applications were accepted prior to 1st October 2022, just for members' benefit, please.
Happy to do that, Convener, and it's similar to the question that you asked originally. Mr. Clark's advice is not specific to this proposal. Mr. Clark is publishing an article that deals with the matter in general terms. There was a period of time where planning permissions granted were generally granted subject to something called a direction, which limited the duration of the permission. There were some permissions, time-limited permissions, so permissions that were limited for a 40-year period, as in this case, where a condition remained necessary. The Act was clear that a direction did not apply in those circumstances. The matter was dealt with by a planning condition. The reporter, in this case, explains why a condition is necessary. He has attached a condition regarding timescales, and Section 42 provides mechanism for that condition to be varied.
Thanks, Mr. Hunter. Mr. Singh, do you have anything to add to that? No. Okay, thanks for that. Thanks very much, Ms. Speedy. Again, any questions from members for Mr. Speedy? No. Well, thanks very much, Mr. Speedy. We'll move on to Mr. Is it Moisey? Mr. Moisey? If you want to take a seat here, Mr. Moisey. Mr. Moisey is speaking on behalf of the applicant and is actually. Do you wish to speak on anything or just answer the question, Mr. Moisey?
I've just got a short statement to read out, if that's okay.
So I have a short statement, and then if you remain for any questions to be asked, yep. That's okay. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, everybody. Firstly, thank you, Mr. Hunter, for your presentation there. Councillors, thank you for your time today and allowing me to say a few words. I'm John Moisey, I'm Senior Project Manager with Solar 2, based in our Perth office. We're an independently UK-owned and based renewable energy developer with offices throughout Scotland, England and Wales. I'm joined today virtually by Lisa Russell, our planning consultant, who's the Planning and EIA Director for Scotland from Stevenson Halliday, which is part of the RSK group. Berryhill Solar Farm is a significant achievement for the Scottish renewable industry and a significant contribution from the Angus area towards Scotland's net zero goals. The project will also help towards the Scottish Government policy announced on the 28th of October 2023 for a solar deployment ambition of between 4 and 6 gigawatts by 2030, with a condition for large-scale solar projects to be at level of community benefit as well as improved energy security. It is the first solar farm in Scotland to be awarded a contract for difference and will generate the electricity needs of the equivalent of around 12,500 homes, which equates to around 1 in 3 households within the Angus region. The key purpose of the application presented to you today, as stated, relates solely to the time limit of the permission. At the time of the application, the project had a grid connection date contracted with the DNO for October 2024. Since permission was granted, the distribution network operator has adjusted the timeline for the grid connection to a later date of August 2026. The initial permission had a time limit of 3 years, and as such we are seeking to extend this to 5 years from the date of permission to accommodate the extended grid connection lead time imposed on us by the DNO. Relevant updated assessments have presented findings in support of the development, and an updated planning statement has drawn on NPF 4 to assess the suitability of the approved development against the updated policy landscape. National planning policy wholly supports the approved development and confirms the suitability of the proposal before you today. Specifically, I would draw your attention to NPF 4 Policy 11, which states that grids should not constrain development of this type. As the UK independently owned energy developer, Solar 2 are committed to local community benefit as well as the wider community. As a business, we invest in young people through an apprenticeship and graduate employment scheme, contribute to the UK economy, and where possible support local businesses and community projects. I'd thank you again for your time, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions directly or with the aid of Lisa, our consultant, as well.
Thanks very much. Are there any questions for the applicant from members? Councillor Dunno?
this may come across as a silly question, but you have to wait until you're connected to the grid. Can you, in that time limit, that years that you have to wait, can you not store the energy from the solar panels into battery storage units until then? Is that a silly question?
There's no such thing as a silly question, I would say, right enough. If we were to do that, that would require subsequent application for construction of battery storage. What we're looking at, obviously, we're looking at export capacity of up to 50 megawatts on this site. If you were to store 50 megawatts of power into 50 megawatt hours worth of batteries, you'd be far in excess of the actual scale of the site as a whole in terms of the number of battery units that you would require to store that. And we're looking at a 2-year kind of process in terms of that connection lead time. So there's no physical way to build the site and then do anything with the power at all, effectively.
Councillor Melville.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that, and thanks for the statement as well. Obviously, if this was then to be granted, you're looking at a lead-in time for construction. So, if we were to grant the extension to 2027, when would you actually look to be starting construction on the site?
So construction on site would be looking to start 18 months prior to September 2027. I can confirm that SSE are now undertaking their required works in terms of the land consenting for the grid connection route. So everything is in hand and moving forward effectively on that basis for that date. So.
Any other members' questions? Just for clarification, Mr. Moisey, then just again, similar as I asked the council officer here, if this was refused, nothing's to stop you going along and starting work now for up to the September 2025, is there? Because that plan application is extant, so you could start work regardless, even though you actually can't, join the grid till 2026.
Yeah, no, I take your point. What we try to do is we try to make everything line up the right way, effectively, as opposed to going and putting a spade in the ground or building a construction access or the like, and then something fails with funding at a later date. You've then got a partially started development that doesn't benefit anybody at the end of the day, and it just seems a bit disingenuous to kick off an application when you haven't got everything lined up in order to actually facilitate completing that, because we want to realise the goal of generating renewable energy for the region and for Scotland as a whole. So,
for the avoidance of doubt, you could actually still do that though, regardless. You could start.
Yes.
Beforehand. Okay, thank you. One last call for any other questions for the objector. Sorry, for the applicant, apologies. Councillor Bass, do you want to say anything?
Yeah. I think it's entirely appropriate for the applicant to want to delay construction because, well, for a start, it costs an awful lot of money. They have to raise an awful lot of money to put up this solar farm, and they need to have income to do that. There's no point in putting panels in place until you're ready to generate. It's common sense. Thanks.
We'll move on to comments. Councillor Melville.
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with Councillor Bays. I think this is a completely reasonable request. While I take into account the objections, and in particular I thank Mr Speedy for coming on to discuss them with us. We've already heard in terms of the development of technology that if there was a change in technology that would then require likely a completely different application, and obviously that's not the case. I think that we need to support renewable development. Obviously NPF4 has that at its heart, but in terms of the nation and global transition to net zero, then we need to do everything that we can to make it easier for people to generate renewable energy. So wholeheartedly in support of this.
Councillor Dawn, I'll take you straight away now.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this one obviously this was discussed before I joined the council, so wasn't part of the original discussions of this one. At this point, yep, the planning has been approved, and it could start immediately, but the extension is being asked. I think with the extensions around solar, and obviously we've seen an increase in applications for solar in Angus, is that land is being held and not used while it's being while people are waiting for the infrastructure to connect up, as there's been a number of applications that have come forward for solar farms. But on this one, like, there doesn't seem to be any grounds to stop this from going forward, this extension. But I just wanted to raise a concern about that maybe an increased number of these as people wait for the infrastructure to connect up solar farms.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Doran. Any other comments? Councillor Duff?
Yeah, I'd agree with my colleagues. I think it's a perfectly reasonable proposal and we should accept it. I would just point out that when the original planning application was rejected by this committee in February 22, that of course was prior to approval of MPF 4 in February 23. So that I would suggest would have tilted the weight in favour of approval on the original application, if you think about it, or it should have done. Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Duff. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Convener. Well, at the time that there was a changeover in the adoption of NPF 4, I wasn't around either here, so I can only go on what I'm seeing, and I really am quite comforted with the conditions. There's many of them. I've read them. They are extensive, and that's really good. That's commendable, because that's important. And then that we stick by conditions. But I have nothing but praise for what you're trying to do here, and really want to encourage that. Thank you. But please keep to your conditions.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Any more comments? No? Okay. In that case, just want a quick sum up here again. In this case, the Planning Commission hearing is for an application made under Section 42 of the Act for the extension of the time on the planning application, variation of Condition 1. In this case, the planning permission remains extant and implementable, and the resultant development offers potential to generate renewable energy, as we know, and under NPF 4 is even more appropriate. An extended time period for implementation of the planning permission is justified, I think, to align with anticipated availability of a grid connection. In extending it, I do have a slight concern about setting any precedents here regardless, but as Councillor Clark has mentioned about extensions, but I don't see any other concern here. It has been granted on appeal and NPF 4 is now in place, so I would move to approve. Councillor Melville to second. Is there any amendment? Okay, in that case, the application subject to the conditions stated. Thank you very much. That brings the meeting of Development Standards to an end today. Can I thank everyone for their attendance and contributions? As always, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
John, can we stop the live stream, please?